He had come to a friend's wedding expecting the usual festivities, but one look at the bride made him wary. A strange detail kept him on his toes, and when he looked under her dress, he found himself in complete shock. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Jonathan Harper had long ago accepted that his life was meant to be one of discipline, dedication, and purpose. He was a renowned reproductive specialist, a doctor whose expertise had brought happiness to countless couples struggling with infertility. Patients flew in from different states to seek his consultation, and his colleagues held him in high regard. If there was a challenge in the field of reproductive medicine, Jonathan was the man to solve it. But for all his success in the medical world, his personal life was an entirely different story. His life outside the hospital was sterile, not in the medical sense, but in a way that reflected a deliberate emotional distance from people. He worked late, kept minimal social commitments, and avoided romantic entanglements altogether. There was a time when he had imagined a different life for himself, one that involved a wife, children, and a home filled with warmth. But that future had been stolen from him years ago when Emily walked out of his life without an explanation. Emily. Even now, years later, the mere thought of her name caused something deep inside him to tighten. He had spent so much time trying to rationalize her departure, to make sense of it the way he would a complex medical case, but there was never a logical explanation. One day, she was there, his partner, his love, the woman he had planned to build a future with, and the next, she was gone. No phone calls, no messages, just a single, hastily written note telling him that she couldn't stay. He had searched for her. At first, with desperation, then with quiet determination. He had tried to respect her wishes, but deep down, he had always hoped for closure, some sort of resolution to the story they had started together. But the years passed, and eventually, he had no choice but to accept that she was truly gone. The past was the past. He had moved on, if moving on meant throwing himself entirely into his work and ensuring that no woman would ever have the chance to leave him again. He had grown used to his solitude. It suited him. At least, that was what he told himself. And then the wedding invitation arrived. Jonathan had nearly tossed it aside without a second glance. It had arrived in a sleek, cream-colored envelope with embossed gold lettering. He had assumed it was from a former colleague or a patient who had, for some reason, decided to invite him to their celebration. It wasn't until he glanced at the names on the card that his interest piqued. Michael Turner and Catherine Reynolds. Michael was his best friend. They had known each other since college, though their lives had taken very different paths. Michael had gone into corporate law, while Jonathan had pursued medicine. Despite the differences in their careers, their friendship had endured. Michael had always been the more social of the two, the one who made an effort to stay connected. Jonathan hadn't even realized Michael was engaged. He hadn't mentioned a fiancé during their last conversation, but then again, it had been months since they had last spoken. A small, cynical part of Jonathan wondered if that was a sign of how distant he had become from the people in his life. He had always been focused on work, but lately he had felt even more detached. Was that why Michael hadn't even bothered to tell him about his engagement? He turned the card over in his hands, debating whether to attend. Weddings weren't his thing. The idea of sitting through a long ceremony, making small talk with strangers, and pretending to celebrate love when he had long since given up on it wasn't exactly appealing. But Michael was his friend. He had stood by Jonathan during some of the hardest times of his life. Skipping his wedding without a good reason felt wrong. With a sigh, Jonathan set the invitation down on his desk and leaned back in his chair. He would go. He would endure the speeches, the awkward conversations, the endless questioning about why he wasn't dating anyone. He would smile, offer his congratulations, and leave as soon as it was socially acceptable. It would be one night, a few hours at most. What harm could it do? The wedding day arrived sooner than he expected. Jonathan had spent the morning at the hospital, finishing a consultation with a patient who had recently undergone IVF treatment. By the time he checked the clock, he realized he had just enough time to shower, change, and make it to the venue before the ceremony started. The event was being held at a grand estate outside the city. Jonathan had no doubt that Michael had spared no expense. His friend had always had a taste for the extravagant. As Jonathan pulled up to the venue, he was greeted by a valet who took his car keys and directed him toward the entrance. Inside, the decor was as luxurious as he had expected. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the elegantly dressed guests. Tables were set with pristine white linens, delicate floral arrangements, and flickering candlelight. The atmosphere was warm, celebratory, filled with a low hum of conversations and laughter. Jonathan recognized a few familiar faces, old acquaintances from college, colleagues of Michael's, but he wasn't in the mood for small talk. He made his way to his assigned seat, grateful for the temporary solitude. The ceremony was about to begin. A hush fell over the room as the music started, signaling the entrance of the bridal party. Jonathan turned his attention toward the front of the hall, watching as the bridesmaids made their way down the aisle, followed by the flower girl, then the ring bearer, and then the bride. Jonathan barely paid attention at first. He saw the elegant white dress, the delicate lace veil draping over her shoulders, the poised way she carried herself as she walked toward Michael. But then something caught his eye. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she moved, the tilt of her chin. His stomach tightened. It wasn't possible. The bride reached Michael's side. The officiant began speaking, welcoming everyone to the ceremony, but Jonathan could barely process the words. His gaze was locked on the woman standing before them, on the only part of her face he could see beneath the sheer veil. His heart pounded as realization crept in. He knew her. Somehow, impossibly, he knew her. Jonathan sat motionless in his seat, his gaze fixed on the woman standing beside Michael at the altar. His mind rejected the possibility, but his instincts screamed otherwise. The familiarity of her posture, the subtle tilt of her chin, the way she held her hands delicately in front of her, it was all too familiar. His rational mind told him that it was a coincidence, a trick of the lighting or his own subconscious playing cruel games. But the pounding in his chest told him otherwise. He clenched his fists against his thighs, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He hadn't seen Emily in years. He had given up searching for her long ago, forcing himself to move forward, to bury whatever remnants of hope had lingered. And yet, as he sat there now, watching this woman standing beside his best friend, the past came crashing back in a suffocating wave. The ceremony carried on, the officiant's words blending into a distant hum. The guests around him were enraptured, watching the couple exchange smiles and whispered words. Jonathan barely registered any of it. His eyes never left the bride. He told himself he was being paranoid, but every instinct in him rebelled against the thought. Then he saw it. As the bride turned slightly, her veil shifting over her shoulder, the lace trim moved just enough for him to catch sight of her collarbone. His breath caught in his throat. There, Just above the delicate neckline of her gown was a small, unmistakable birthmark. His entire body tensed. It was the same birthmark Emily had always had, a very distinct shape positioned just below her right collarbone. A mark he had traced with his fingers countless times, a mark that was impossible to forget. His stomach twisted into a painful knot, his pulse hammering in his ears. The room around him blurred, the murmuring voices and soft background music nothing but noise. It wasn't just a coincidence. The woman standing at the altar was Emily. The realization slammed into him with the force of a freight train. His mind raced for an explanation. She had disappeared. She had cut him out of her life completely. So how was she standing there now, just a few feet away from him, marrying his best friend? His breathing turned shallow, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as he fought the urge to stand, to do something. But what? Interrupt the ceremony? Demand an explanation? He barely had time to process the thought when another detail caught his attention. The bride shifted again, adjusting her dress as she moved to take Michael's hands. The fabric of the gown pulled slightly at her side, revealing a small scar just above her hip. Jonathan's head swam. That scar. It was faint, but he recognized it. Years ago, Emily had been in a minor accident. Nothing serious, just a fall that had left her with a small but permanent scar on her side. He had been with her when she got the stitches. He remembered how she had laughed at the irony of being a nurse but hating the sight of her own wounds. There was no mistaking it. It was her. Jonathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. But if it was Emily, why was she here? Why was she marrying Michael under a different name? His mind reeled, struggling to make sense of it. The Emily he had known would never do this. She wouldn't just leave him only to reappear years later, engaged to someone he was close to. She wouldn't, unless she had been hiding something all along. The vows continued. Jonathan barely heard them. He knew he was running out of time to decide what to do. He could feel the weight of the secret pressing down on him like a leaden blanket. If he remained silent, he would be complicit in whatever lie Emily was living. If he spoke up, he would be exposing something that could destroy lives. The audience erupted into polite applause as the officiant pronounced Michael and Catherine husband and wife. Michael lifted her veil, leaning in for the ceremonial kiss. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He couldn't look away, even though every fiber of his being wanted to. As the kiss ended, the guests stood, cheering and clapping. Jonathan remained seated, feeling as though the ground beneath him had shifted irreparably. The reception followed soon after. Jonathan kept his distance, unwilling to approach either Michael or the bride just yet. He needed time to think. He needed to find a way to confront her without making a scene. At dinner, he sat at his assigned table, pushing food around his plate without eating. The atmosphere was warm, celebratory. Michael was all smiles, greeting guests, sharing drinks and laughter. But Jonathan's focus remained on Emily. Now that he knew, he saw it more clearly. The tension in her shoulders, the way she forced her smiles, the way she avoided direct eye contact with him. She knew. She knew he was there, and she was terrified that he had recognized her. Jonathan's mind raced through the possibilities. Was she in danger? Had something happened that forced her to change her identity? Or was this something else entirely? He didn't have answers, but he was determined to find them. As the evening progressed, guests began to take to the dance floor. Michael and his bride shared their first dance. Jonathan's eyes stayed locked on them, studying every move she made. She laughed at something Michael whispered in her ear, but Jonathan caught the brief flicker of unease in her expression. A woman sitting next to him nudged his arm, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a chuckle, sipping her champagne. He forced a tight smile, shaking his head, but in a way, that was exactly how he felt. Emily had become a ghost in his life. One moment there, the next gone, only to now resurface in the most impossible way. His patience was wearing thin. The opportunity to talk to her alone came later in the night. As guests mingled and the party carried on, Emily excused herself from Michael's side and stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air. Jonathan took a slow breath, steadying himself. This was it. He couldn't let her slip away again. With measured steps, he made his way through the crowd and followed her outside. Jonathan stepped onto the terrace, his breath steady but his heart pounding. The night air was cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the reception hall behind him. He spotted her immediately. She stood near the railing, her back to him, gazing out into the dimly lit gardens below. The soft glow of the hanging lanterns illuminated her silhouette, casting delicate shadows against the fabric of her wedding dress. For a moment, he hesitated. What was he supposed to say? What words could possibly encompass the years of questions, the ache of abandonment, the unbearable weight of finding her here, like this? He had imagined countless scenarios in which they might meet again, accidentally running into each other in a crowded city, a chance encounter in a cafe, even a carefully orchestrated conversation where she would explain everything. But never, in his wildest thoughts, had he envisioned this. She sensed his presence before he spoke. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and though she didn't turn, he knew she was aware of him. That, more than anything, confirmed his suspicions. She knew. She had seen him at the ceremony, and she had been avoiding him ever since. He took a step closer. His voice was low, measured, yet filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. "Catherine." The name felt foreign on his tongue, an ill-fitting mask that she had chosen to wear. At the sound of it, she inhaled sharply but still didn't turn to face him. Jonathan's patience was thin. The years of silence had built up too many unanswered questions, and now that she was here, standing right in front of him, he refused to let her slip away again. Emily. This time she stiffened completely. He watched as her fingers curled around the railing, gripping the cold metal as if grounding herself. Slowly, painfully, she turned to face him. The soft light caught the features he knew so well, though they had changed in subtle ways. Her hair was styled differently, her makeup refined, and her expression was carefully composed. But it was her. It was always her. The silence stretched between them. He could see it in her eyes, the war waging inside her. She was calculating, deciding whether to continue the charade or acknowledge the truth. Jonathan didn't give her the chance to lie. "It's you," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. "I know it's you." A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt, sorrow, regret. She parted her lips as if to speak, but no words came. Jonathan stepped closer, watching her carefully. He didn't know what he expected. An apology? An excuse? A reason that would make sense of the years of silence? Instead, she let out a breath, barely a whisper of sound, and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the fight was gone. She nodded, just once. Jonathan felt his stomach drop. He had known, of course, but hearing her acknowledge it made the weight of it all settle heavily inside him. "You disappeared," he said, not a question, but a statement of fact. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay the storm of emotions he had been holding back. "I looked for you." Emily's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment she looked exactly as she had the last time he had seen her, quiet, conflicted, on the verge of running again. "I know," she finally said. Her voice was softer than he remembered, almost hesitant. "I didn't want to be found." Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had spent so long convincing himself that there had to be an explanation, that something had happened, something beyond his control, something that had forced her away from him. But now, standing here, hearing her say those words, it felt like another blow, one he hadn't been prepared for. "Why?" The question was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of all the years between them. She hesitated. For the first time, she looked directly at him, and in that moment, he saw everything. The sadness, the pain, the remnants of something she had tried so hard to bury. Then she spoke. "When I left, I was pregnant." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. His mind stalled, unable to process the words immediately. She was pregnant. The world around them seemed to slow. He felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted, tilting everything he knew into unfamiliar territory. He stared at her, waiting for some clarification, for something that would make this revelation easier to grasp. She swallowed, and when she spoke again, her voice was unsteady. "I lost the baby." Jonathan exhaled, a sharp, painful sound. His pulse pounded in his ears as he tried to comprehend what she was telling him. She had been pregnant. And then, she hadn't been. Everything clicked into place. The way she had vanished so suddenly, the way she had refused to let him find her, the way she had erased herself from his life. "You thought I wouldn't want you anymore," he said, realization dawning on him like a brutal wave. "That's why you left." A single tear slipped down her cheek and she brushed it away quickly. "You wanted a family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You always talked about how much you wanted children. And then I lost the baby, and the doctors told me I wouldn't be able to have any more. I didn't want you to stay with me out of pity." Jonathan's chest ached. He thought back to all the nights he had spent wondering what had gone wrong, all the times he had questioned himself, convinced that he had failed her somehow, and all this time she had been suffering alone, believing that she was making the right choice by pushing him away. "You decided for me," he said, struggling to keep his voice even. She nodded, her expression filled with remorse. "I did." Silence fell between them once more, but this time it was heavier, weighted with too many things left unsaid for too long. Jonathan felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: anger, sadness, frustration, but above all else, he felt an overwhelming sense of loss. She had made her decision. And now she was standing before him, wearing a wedding dress meant for someone else. A painful realization settled in. She had built a new life, and she had done it without him. Jonathan glanced back toward the ballroom where Michael was still mingling with guests oblivious to the conversation happening just beyond his reach. His best friend, the man who had no idea that the woman he had just married wasn't who she claimed to be. Jonathan looked back at Emily, searching her face for something, anything, that would tell him what to do next. Her eyes were pleading, silently begging him not to say anything, but how could he not? The weight of the truth hung between them, and for the first time in years, Jonathan had a choice to make. Jonathan felt the cool night air pressing against his skin, but it did little to temper the storm raging inside him. He had spent years wondering, aching, searching for answers that had always eluded him. And now, standing here, face to face with Emily, no, Catherine, he had all the answers he had once desperately sought. But instead of relief, all he felt was a deep, aching resentment. Not because she had lost their child, not because she had suffered alone, but because she had stolen his choice from him. She was still gripping the terrace railing, her knuckles white. She had given up pretending, her shoulders slumped under the weight of the truth. Jonathan could see the way she was holding herself together, barely, as if afraid that one wrong word might cause everything to crumble. Michael was just inside, laughing, celebrating, completely unaware that his new wife was not who she claimed to be, that the woman he had just vowed to spend his life with was standing out here with another man, drowning in a past she had tried so hard to erase. Jonathan took a breath, struggling to contain the thousand things he wanted to say. He didn't know where to start. How could he? How did he begin to unravel years of deception, of pain, of all the things she had chosen to keep from him? Emily was the first to break the silence. Her voice was barely audible over the distant hum of the wedding party. "I didn't expect you to be here," she admitted. Jonathan almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Neither did I." She swallowed hard. I should have told you, a long time ago." The words sounded weak, insubstantial compared to the depth of what had actually happened. Jonathan had imagined so many scenarios of their reunion, but none of them had prepared him for this moment. "You think?" His voice was edged with bitterness, though he wasn't sure if it was directed at her or at himself for still caring after all this time. She closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again, her expression full of regret. "I was afraid. I thought leaving was the right thing to do." "The right thing to do," Jonathan repeated, barely able to contain his disbelief. "You thought disappearing, letting me think I had done something to push you away, was the right thing to do?" Her gaze faltered. "I didn't want you to be stuck with me. I thought I was saving you from what?" Jonathan cut her off, his voice rising slightly. "From loving you? From wanting to be with you, no matter what? Because if you think I wouldn't have stayed, if you think losing our baby would have changed how I felt about you, then you never really knew me at all." Emily flinched as if he had struck her. He could see the guilt, the pain, the way she was fighting back emotions that threatened to break free. "I knew you," she said softly. "That's why I left. Because I knew you would stay. I knew you would give up everything to be with me, and I couldn't let you do that." Jonathan let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "So, you made that decision for me? You thought you had the right to decide what I wanted?" "I was trying to do the right thing," she whispered. His chest ached with the weight of her words, the twisted logic of it all. The idea that she had believed, even for a second, that leaving him had been some kind of noble sacrifice, instead of the cruelest thing she could have done. "You didn't do the right thing, Emily. You ran, and now you're here, standing in front of me, pretending to be someone else, married to my best friend." Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly turned away as if ashamed to let him see her break. But Jonathan had already seen her at her most vulnerable. He knew her better than anyone, even after all these years. "I never planned this," she admitted. "When I left, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. And then I met Michael, and it was easy, simple. He didn't know about my past. He didn't ask questions. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could start over." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "Did you ever love him?" She hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough. "I care about him," she said finally, and Jonathan understood what she wasn't saying. She didn't love Michael, not the way she had loved him. He exhaled sharply, stepping back as the reality of the situation hit him in full force. Emily, Catherine, had built a life on lies. She had rewritten her story, created a version of herself that wasn't weighed down by the past, but the past had caught up with her tonight. And now he had to decide what to do with it. Inside the reception hall, laughter and music continued, oblivious to the storm unraveling just outside. Jonathan could see Michael through the large glass doors, raising a toast, surrounded by friends and family. Completely unaware. Emily followed his gaze, her expression tightening. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "don't tell him." Jonathan felt something inside him twist painfully. The woman he had loved, the woman he had spent years searching for, was now standing in front of him, begging him to keep her secret. He didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she had lied for so long, or the fact that she still didn't trust him enough to believe he would do the right thing. "What do you expect me to do?" he asked, his voice raw. Emily swallowed, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. "Please, Jonathan, just walk away." Walk away. The words echoed in his mind. It would be easy, wouldn't it, to pretend he had never come here, to pretend he hadn't seen her, to let her continue living this life she had built for herself. But that wasn't who he was, and no matter how much it hurt, he couldn't ignore the truth. Jonathan glanced back at Michael one last time, then met Emily's gaze with a determination she hadn't seen in years. "I can't," he said, his voice steady. "He deserves to know." Emily's face crumpled with emotion, but Jonathan had already made his choice. The truth was coming out, and there was no stopping it now. Jonathan turned away from the terrace, his pulse hammering as he walked back toward the reception hall. His decision had been made the moment Emily had pleaded with him to keep her secret. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't. No matter how much he once loved her, no matter how much seeing her again had ripped open old wounds, he couldn't let this lie stand. Michael was his best friend. He deserved the truth. Emily didn't follow him at first. He heard her sharp intake of breath, the soft rustle of her wedding dress as she hesitated. She wasn't ready for this, and she certainly didn't want this confrontation. But it was no longer just about what she wanted. Jonathan walked through the open doors of the reception hall, the warm glow of chandeliers and the hum of laughter surrounding him. The contrast between the celebratory atmosphere inside and the storm of emotions raging inside him was stark. He scanned the room and quickly found Michael near the bar, raising a toast with a few of their old college friends. His face was flushed with happiness, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of the evening. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Jonathan moved with purpose, threading his way through the tables. Every step felt heavier than the last. His chest tightened with the weight of what he was about to do. As he neared, Michael caught sight of him and grinned, raising his glass in greeting. "Hey, you finally decided to join the fun," Michael called out, his voice light and filled with laughter. "For a second, I thought you'd slipped out early. You always hated these things." Jonathan's throat was dry. He forced himself to keep moving, closing the distance between them until he was just a few feet away. The noise of the room faded into the background, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Michael's smile wavered slightly. He wasn't drunk. Michael was always controlled, never one to lose himself in celebration, but he had that relaxed, confident air of a man who believed everything in his world was exactly as it should be. Jonathan's stomach twisted. That illusion was about to shatter. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady but firm. Michael raised an eyebrow, glancing around at the people nearby. "Right now? Can it wait? We're in the middle of—" "No." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "It can't." Michael studied him for a moment, then sighed. He set his drink down, nodding toward a quieter corner near the edge of the room. "All right, what's going on?" Jonathan barely heard the music anymore. He was aware of Emily approaching slowly, hesitant, but knowing there was no stopping what was about to happen. He turned to face Michael, taking a deep breath. There was no easy way to say this. No way to soften the blow. "It's about Catherine," he said, watching his friend's reaction carefully. Michael frowned slightly. "What about her?" Jonathan hesitated, but only for a second. "She's not who you think she is." Michael let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "What the hell does that mean?" Jonathan glanced toward Emily, who had finally reached them, her expression tense and filled with regret. Michael followed his gaze, his confusion deepening. "She's not Catherine Reynolds," Jonathan continued, forcing himself to meet Michael's eyes. "Her real name is Emily Carter." The shift in Michael's expression was immediate. His brows furrowed, and he let out a disbelieving breath, shaking his head again. "I don't... What are you talking about? Catherine is..." "Jonathan's right." Emily's voice was quiet but firm. Michael's head snapped toward her. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "You're joking, right? This is some kind of—" "No," Jonathan interrupted. "It's not a joke. She changed her name, changed her life. She left me years ago, disappeared. And now she's here, marrying you." Michael's expression darkened. He looked back at Emily, searching her face for an explanation, for something that made sense. "Tell me this is a mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with something dangerously close to desperation. Emily swallowed hard. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, "but I didn't know how. I didn't want to lose you." Michael took a step back, as if suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. Jonathan watched his best friend closely, seeing the slow unraveling of trust play out across his face. He hated that it had come to this, but there had never been another option. Michael's jaw clenched. "So what? You just decided to rewrite yourself? To erase your past like it never happened?" Emily blinked back tears. "I didn't want to erase it. I wanted to start over." Michael exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "And you thought lying to me was the way to do that?" Jonathan stood silent, letting the moment unfold between them. This was between Emily and Michael now. The truth was out. There was no undoing it. Michael turned to him then, his eyes searching for something, explanation, reason, maybe even betrayal. "How long have you known?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "I recognized her at the ceremony." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you did. And you waited until now to tell me?" "I needed to hear the truth from her first," Jonathan admitted. Michael nodded slowly, as if putting together the final pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to see completed. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Am I supposed to pretend this didn't happen? Just keep going like everything is fine?" Emily shook her head quickly, stepping forward. "Michael, please. This doesn't change how I feel about you." Michael studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said, his voice heavy. "It changes everything." Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of realization. Michael looked at Jonathan then, his eyes tired but understanding. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. Jonathan nodded. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel anything except the dull ache of knowing that no matter how this night ended, none of them would walk away unscathed. Michael took a slow breath, then turned back to Emily. "I need some time." She nodded, eyes glistening, knowing that was the best she could hope for in that moment. Without another word, Michael stepped away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Emily standing there, alone. Jonathan didn't know what to say. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done. But as he looked at Emily, at the woman he had once loved, the woman who had chosen to disappear rather than face their pain together, he realized something else. For the first time since she left, he finally felt closure. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Michael walked away from them without looking back, his shoulders tense, his movements deliberate but rigid, as if he were holding himself together by sheer will alone. The weight of the revelation had hit him hard, but instead of exploding in anger or making a scene, he had chosen to withdraw, to retreat into himself. That, more than anything, told Jonathan just how much this had shaken him. The reception hall still buzzed with conversation, music, and the clinking of glasses, oblivious to the quiet devastation unfolding on the outskirts. Guests laughed and danced, raising toasts to the newlyweds, completely unaware that there was no longer a marriage to celebrate, at least not in the way they had expected. Emily stood motionless, her hands clasped tightly together, her breathing uneven. Jonathan could see the struggle in her, the warring emotions, guilt, sadness, maybe even relief. She had spent years running from the truth, and now that it had finally caught up with her, she had no choice but to face the consequences. Jonathan exhaled slowly, watching as Michael disappeared into the far side of the hall, slipping through a side door and into the dimly lit hallway beyond. He knew his friend well enough to understand that Michael needed space, but also that he couldn't leave him alone in this moment. Not when his entire world had just shifted in an instant. He turned to Emily. She finally met his gaze, and for the first time that night there was no pretense, no mask, just raw vulnerability. "You should let me talk to him first," Jonathan said, his voice softer now, no longer edged with the anger that had driven him earlier. Emily nodded, pressing her lips together as if holding back words she wasn't sure she should say. Then she stepped back, allowing Jonathan to pass, silently surrendering to whatever was about to come next. Jonathan followed the same path Michael had taken, pushing open the door that led into the quiet corridor. The noise of the party faded behind him, replaced by the distant hum of air conditioning and the soft tap of his shoes against the polished floor. He found Michael at the end of the hall, leaning against the wall near a set of large windows that overlooked the estate gardens. His posture was stiff, his hands in his pockets, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't turn when Jonathan approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, thick with words that hadn't been said yet, with the weight of a friendship now standing at a precipice. Jonathan stopped a few feet away, giving Michael space but making it clear he wasn't leaving. He had known this man for years. He had seen him in courtrooms delivering closing arguments with an air of unshakable confidence. He had watched him negotiate deals, handle pressure, navigate high-stakes situations with ease. But this was different. This wasn't a legal case. This wasn't something he could rationalize, compartmentalize, or fix with well-reasoned arguments. This was personal. Michael finally let out a slow, measured breath. "How long?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Jonathan knew exactly what he was asking. "I recognized her at the ceremony," he admitted. But I didn't know for sure until I saw the scar. That's when I knew it was her." Michael let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "And you didn't say anything right away?" Jonathan swallowed hard. I needed to hear the truth from her first. Michael turned slightly, just enough to glance at Jonathan from the corner of his eye. "Did you get the truth?" Jonathan nodded. "Yeah, I did." Michael exhaled through his nose, looking back out the window. "I thought I knew her," he murmured. "I really thought I knew her." Jonathan didn't respond. What could he say? "I keep going over it in my head," Michael continued, his voice quiet but tense. "All the moments that should have been red flags, the little things she avoided talking about, the parts of her past that never quite added up. And I ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need to know everything about who she was before we met. I never pushed, never asked too many questions because I wanted to respect her boundaries. And now I realize—" He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "I realized that I was never respecting her boundaries. I was just blind." Jonathan took a step closer, watching his friend carefully. "She cared about you." Michael turned to face him fully now, his expression unreadable. "Cared?" He let the word linger between them before shaking his head. "Did she ever love me?" Jonathan hesitated. He thought back to the conversation on the terrace, to the way Emily had struggled to answer the same question. He had seen the hesitation, the brief flicker of guilt. "She wanted to," Jonathan said finally. "I think she really tried." Michael's lips pressed into a thin line, and he nodded, as if that answer confirmed what he had already suspected. Jonathan watched him carefully. "I didn't want to tell you like this, but I couldn't let you go into this without knowing." Michael studied him for a long moment, then let out a breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "I get it," he said quietly, "and I don't blame you. If our positions were reversed, I'd have done the same thing." Relief flickered through Jonathan, but it was fleeting. This wasn't over. Michael sighed, glancing back toward the reception hall. "I need some time," he admitted. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen." Jonathan nodded. "I know." Michael pushed off the wall, standing up straighter. He was still shaken, but Jonathan could see him piecing himself back together in real time. That was who Michael was. He didn't let things break him. Not completely. "What are you going to do?" Jonathan asked. Michael was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he exhaled, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, but I know I can't be in that room right now." Jonathan didn't stop him when he turned and walked away. He stood there in the quiet, watching as his best friend disappeared down the hall, leaving behind a wedding that no longer existed. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt something shift inside himself. The past had finally caught up to them all. And now there was no going back. Jonathan stood in the dimly lit hallway long after Michael had left. The quiet settled over him like a weight, pressing against his chest as he tried to process everything that had just happened. The night had unraveled in ways he never could have predicted, turning what was supposed to be a joyous occasion into something fractured, raw, and irreversibly changed. He turned back toward the reception hall. Through the glass doors, he could see the guests still celebrating, still laughing and drinking, oblivious to the wreckage left behind. Some of them must have noticed Michael's absence or the way the bride had slipped away, but no one seemed overly concerned. The show was still going on, even as the main players had begun to walk away. Then his eyes found her, Emily stood just inside, near the entrance to the ballroom, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wasn't crying, but she looked as if she could break apart at any second. She'd always been good at holding things together, at pretending she was fine, but Jonathan knew her too well. She was unraveling. She lifted her gaze and found him standing outside the doors. For a long moment, neither of them moved. There was nothing left to hide, no more pretending. Jonathan exhaled, then pushed open the door and stepped inside. Emily straightened as he approached, but she didn't speak first. Instead, she watched him with guarded eyes, waiting. He stopped in front of her, his pulse steady now, no longer driven by anger or resentment. There was only the quiet understanding that they had reached a crossroads, and whatever happened next would define the rest of their lives. "Michael left," Jonathan said finally. Emily swallowed, nodding. "I figured he would. He needs time." "I know." Silence stretched between them. The music in the background felt distant, like it belonged to another world entirely. Jonathan studied her, seeing the exhaustion written across her face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. "I didn't want it to happen like this," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt him." Jonathan believed her. Whatever else had happened, whatever choices she had made, he knew she had never set out to destroy Michael. She had wanted a new life, a fresh start. She had wanted to escape her past, but in the end, the past had found her anyway. "You lied to him," Jonathan said, not unkindly, just stating the truth. Emily flinched slightly, but didn't look away. "I did." "And you lied to yourself." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Yeah," she admitted. "I did that too." Jonathan hesitated. There was still so much between them, so much unresolved, but the storm that had been raging in his chest all night had quieted. He had spent so long being angry at her for leaving, angry at himself for never understanding why, angry at the universe for taking away something that had once felt so certain. But now, standing here, he realized something. The anger was gone. All that was left was the question of what came next. "Why did you say yes?" he asked. Emily blinked. "What?" "To Michael. Why did you agree to marry him?" She let out a slow breath, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Because it was easy," she admitted. "Because he was safe. He didn't know my past. He didn't ask questions. I thought if I could just start over with him, if I could be someone else, I wouldn't have to carry all of this anymore." She gestured vaguely, as if encompassing everything, the past, the pain, the loss. "But it didn't work," Jonathan said. Emily shook her head. "No, it didn't." Another beat of silence passed. Jonathan thought about the years they had lost, about the choices she had made, the choices he had been denied. He thought about the way she had looked at him tonight, the way his heart had still recognized her, despite everything. "You asked me to walk away," he said. Emily nodded slowly, her expression cautious. Jonathan took a step closer. "I don't think I can." Her breath hitched, but she didn't move, didn't retreat. Instead, she held his gaze, searching his face for something. Hesitation, doubt, uncertainty. But she wouldn't find any of that, because for the first time in years, Jonathan knew exactly what he wanted. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. Emily's lips parted slightly, her eyes widening. He could see the battle happening inside her, the fear and hope warring within her. "You left me once," he continued. "I won't let you do it again." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Jonathan, if you don't love me, if you don't want this, tell me now. I'll leave. I'll let you go." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered. Jonathan exhaled, his chest tightening. He had prepared himself for rejection, for the possibility that too much had happened, that too much had changed. But hearing her say it, seeing the raw honesty in her eyes, made everything else fade away. "Then don't run this time," he said. Emily let out a shaky laugh, brushing away a tear. "Where would I even go?" He smiled, just slightly. "Anywhere. But this time I'll go with you." Her laughter turned into a quiet sob, and before he could think, she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. Jonathan held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in. It felt like coming home after years of being lost. The world around them continued. Guests still danced, music still played, the wedding celebration still carried on. But in this moment, none of it mattered. This was their second chance. And this time, neither of them was letting go. Jonathan held Emily in his arms, feeling the weight of the past dissolve in the warmth of her embrace. The years of separation, the unanswered questions, the resentment, and the heartbreak all faded into the background. It no longer mattered why she had left or what had kept them apart. What mattered was that she was here, in his arms, and she wasn't running anymore. The music in the reception hall played on, and around them, people continued celebrating, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. Jonathan could feel Emily's breath against his chest, steadying, as if she too had finally let go of the tension that had held her captive for so long. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her eyes still shimmering with emotion. He could see the uncertainty lingering there, a silent question hanging between them. What now? Jonathan gently cupped her face, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "We figure it out," he said softly, answering the question she hadn't voiced. Emily let out a soft, relieved laugh, shaking her head. "I don't even know where to start." Jonathan smiled. "We start here, right now." She glanced around the room, her expression turning serious again. "Michael?" Jonathan nodded. "He needs time. I don't know if he'll forgive you, or me, or if he even should, but that's his decision now." Emily swallowed hard. "I never wanted to hurt him." "I know," Jonathan said. And he did. Whatever mistakes she had made, whatever choices had led them to this moment, he knew that she had never meant to cause harm. She had been running from pain, not trying to inflict it. He glanced toward the far side of the room where Michael had disappeared earlier. He wasn't sure if his friend would return tonight, or if this was the last time they would speak for a long while. But Jonathan had made his choice, and he knew Michael had to make his own. Emily took a deep breath, her hands tightening around his. "What if this doesn't work?" Jonathan met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Then we try again, and again, until we get it right." A slow smile formed on her lips, the first real smile he had seen from her all night. The weight of everything was still there, but it no longer felt impossible. Jonathan turned slightly, scanning the room. Then, with a quiet certainty, he took her hand and led her toward the center of the dance floor. People parted as they moved, some watching in confusion, others in curiosity. The wedding guests were still lost in their own celebrations, unaware that the original bride and groom were no longer together. Jonathan stopped near the dance floor, meeting the eyes of the band leader, who was watching the scene unfold with intrigue. Jonathan gave him a small nod, and the music shifted. A slower melody filled the room, something softer, more intimate. Emily looked up at him in surprise as Jonathan pulled her closer. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with nervous laughter. Jonathan smiled. "Giving you the wedding dance you never had." She let out a shaky breath, but she didn't resist. Instead, she let herself melt into him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders as they swayed together. It wasn't the dance she had planned for tonight, but it was the one that mattered. As they moved, Jonathan glanced around the room, half expecting someone to step in, to question what was happening, but the guests either didn't notice or didn't care. Perhaps they assumed it was part of the night's chaos, or maybe they just saw two people who belonged together. Emily rested her head against his chest, and Jonathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, allowing himself to simply feel. The music, the warmth of her in his arms, the quiet understanding that, after everything, they had found their way back to each other. As the song ended, a round of applause broke out from some of the guests, though they likely had no idea what they were truly witnessing. Emily looked up at him, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We really just did that," she murmured. Jonathan chuckled. "Yeah, we did." She bit her lip, glancing around the room. "People are going to have questions." Jonathan smirked. "Let them ask." Emily laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." He leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against her forehead. "But you love me anyway." She sighed dramatically. "Yeah, I guess I do." The warmth in his chest spread. There had been so much pain, so much loss, but in this moment, none of it mattered. They had a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. As the night carried on, Jonathan found himself feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight of the past was still there, but it was no longer suffocating. For the first time in a long time, he could see a future, not just for himself, but for the two of them. And this time he wasn't going to let go. As the last song of the night played and the remaining guests began to drift away, Jonathan took Emily's hand once more, leading her toward the exit. The world outside was waiting, uncertain and full of challenges, but they would face it together, and that was all that mattered. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Watch more videos next and share this one with others.